If you don't prepare RMB, you won't be able to settle oil. These words of the Russian oil seller completely broke India's heart. As a result, India, which did not want to use RMB, found new sellers all over the world. It happened that Venezuela, a Latin American country that had just been lifted from sanctions by the United States, fell into India's eyes. A few days ago, Indian Oil Minister Puri said that the United States has now lifted sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector. So if the price of Venezuelan oil is cheap, India will consider purchasing and processing the country's oil. Puri also explained that India is an oil importer and consumer in the world, and more than 80% of its oil needs to be imported from other countries, so it hopes to reduce import costs as much as possible. Venezuela is one of the countries with the largest oil reserves in the world. If oil can be produced on a large scale and enter the international market, it will have a certain inhibitory effect on the rise in global oil prices, and India will also be able to obtain cheaper oil. We all know that in the past year, India imported the most oil from Russia. But now when we suddenly have to buy oil from Venezuela, which is further away, price is another consideration. There is another more important reason, which is that we don't want to use RMB. So can India's decision this time be successful? Welcome to World Hotspot, where you will be able to learn about projects, cooperation around the world, and important information about China. I hope you can subscribe to me and let us discover more interesting things around the world together. Some time ago, news came out from India and Russia that there were differences between Russia and India on oil settlement. Indian buyers were ready with the UAE currency dirhams, but Russian sellers only accepted RMB, which eventually led to at least 7 disputes between the two parties. There is no way to pay for the batch of goods. India gave 2 reasons for not wanting to use RMB. First, using RMB incurs additional conversion fees for the Indian side, which increases the cost for the Indian side. Second, the Modi government is unwilling. Because this conflicts with the rupee internationalization promoted by India, large-scale use of RMB will weaken the attractiveness of the rupee in the international community. So now that it is looking for Venezuela, India wants to try its best to avoid the use of RMB and prevent India from making a wedding dress for the internationalization of RMB. But unfortunately, India found the wrong target again this time, because China's layout was one step ahead of India. Venezuela is a South American country. Although it is rich in oil and natural gas, it has lost market access due to long-term U.S. sanctions, and there are many restrictions on international trade activities. Living like a beggar is a very appropriate description of Venezuela. Although the United States has lifted restrictions on it, it only lasts for half a year. Moreover, the gap between the two countries cannot be eliminated in the short term. In addition, the United States has previously launched multiple rounds of economic sanctions against Venezuela and explicitly prohibited oil transactions in US dollars. Therefore, it is very risky for Venezuela to use US dollars for energy settlement with India. If it wants to avoid this risk to the greatest extent, Venezuela may have to explore various ways to reduce its dependence on the US dollar to ensure the stability of its international trade and economy. In fact, in order to change its difficult situation, Venezuela has been promoting the de-dollarization process, and its first choice in energy settlement is RMB. As early as 2019, Venezuela had a precedent of using RMB for settlement. At that time, a Venezuelan oil company stated that it had received a payment for oil in RMB. Later, Venezuela also issued an appeal to oil exporting countries around the world, saying that it hoped to switch to RMB for pricing, trading, and settlement of oil. In May this year, Maduro also announced that he would integrate into the global de-dollarization process. Then in September, Maduro brought the country's vice president directly to China for a state visit, staying in China for 7 days. With the expansion of cooperation between China and Venezuela, I believe that the settlement methods between the two parties will soon change. In this way, the various restrictions imposed by U.S. sanctions on Venezuela will also be greatly reduced. So looking at it this way, India's desire to avoid using the yuan in energy transactions may be dashed again. Today, more than 30 countries in the world have agreed to use RMB for settlement. This shows that both the liquidity and stability of the RMB are guaranteed, and the status and credibility of the RMB in the international monetary system have been greatly improved. If India wants to promote its own currency, it should focus on enhancing the liquidity and attractiveness of the currency. In addition, while increasing the utilization rate of its own currency in the international market, it must also enhance its own economic strength in international credit and strengthen cooperation with other countries' currency systems. Blindly excluding the RMB will have no effect except harming India's own interests.